Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Mitzi Jonel Tan. I'm a youth climate justice activist from the Philippines and a global coordinator with the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative. Again, this is the fifth session of our Lessons Learned webinar series hosted by the treaty. And in case you just came in, please make sure to check the instructions for interpretation, which we have both in Spanish and French. For those who don't know, the Fossil Fuel Treaty Initiative is at a critical moment in time. We have a committed group of 17 countries, with the latest country just signing on and endorsing, I think it was last week. And they're spearheading the push to negotiate a new treaty and is backed by a powerful global network of 120 city and subnational governments, 3,500 civil society organizations, and over 1 million individuals across every continent. And this Lessons Learned webinar series aims to learn from other movements that have been successful with creating a treaty or are also currently campaigning for one. And it's so important that we learn from each other to truly be able to collaborate with each other. We have tackled banning landmines, nuclear weapons, working towards a plastics treaty, and mobilizing for the arms trade treaty. And today, in our fifth session, we are exploring autonomous weapons. We have two amazing, phenomenal speakers, Richard Moyes, who is a leading voice in international disarmament and humanitarian policy. He is the director and co-founder of the UK-based NGO Article 36, who has helped shape major global treaties, including the bans on cluster munitions and nuclear weapons, and the recent political declaration on explosive weapons in populated areas. He also previously coordinated the Stop Killers Robots Coalition and continues to work for an international legal instrument to ensure meaningful human control in the context of greater autonomy and AI in weapon systems. He was also part of the Nobel Peace Prize winning team of ICANN in 2017 and currently advises the UK Ministry of Defense and AI Ethics. We also have Gisela Luján Andrade, who is a humanitarian disarmament specialist and political advocacy expert, and the founder of Perú por el Desarme, which informs and raises awareness with Peruvian society and among decision makers about the humanitarian risks posed by the fully autonomous weapons. The initiative is also committed to promoting nonviolent communication and fostering a culture of peace. Gisela is also dedicated to explore the humanitarian and ethical impact of artificial intelligence, with a particular emphasis on the process of digital dehumanization and its manifestations in the Latin American region. She also led advocacy efforts before the Peruvian Congress and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, resulting in the ratification of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons by Peru in 2021. Our two speakers today, I think, are very relevant with what's happening across the world today, and this conversation feels very relevant as well as we dive into autonomous weapons. And so, Stop Killer Robot Coalition, what does that mean? Richard, can you tell us about the coalition and why this campaign is so important?
Yeah, thanks, Bitsy, and thanks everyone for joining this call. And first, I guess I wanted to say it's a really nice idea to have these kind of cross coalition, cross sort of campaign, information sharing, lesson learning conversations, not least because in Stop Killer Robots, we're still working to achieve the outcome that we set for ourselves 13 or so years ago. So we're also always trying to learn, because we need to continue to adapt to find ways and to develop strategies to make progress in what's a difficult international environment. Stop Killer Robots, as I said, it was formed 2013, I think, and really came together out of a partnership of people who shared a desire to work together to tackle an issue. Some people who'd worked together previously on some weapons related themes, and here concerned with the threat of autonomy in weapon systems, which is really a sort of process of machines, computers, increasingly computers, making decisions about where and when to apply force on the battlefield. And the idea of autonomy in weapon systems, which we see developing, in conflicts today, is really a sort of stepping back of the direct human control and a sort of devolution to machines and computers of key targeting decisions. And I think for us, with that come a lot of risks around the way in which civilian populations are exposed to harm, the way in which populations of people as a whole are potentially dehumanized even more than they are in current conflict situations, and a breaking down of the key structures of international law, which are really based on the idea of human decision making. International humanitarian law has a lot of challenges and weaknesses as a structure for protecting people in conflict, but it is a structure that's supposed to provide protections in conflict. But it is fundamentally founded on the idea of people being the decision makers. And if you have computers and machines making decisions that are basically following sort of algorithms and data sets and the like, then that legal structure can't really come to bear with the sort of moral significance that it's supposed to have. So it's about weapon technologies, and it's about protection of civilians in conflict. But I think it's also about our relationship with technology in society. I mean, if we're going to allow machines and algorithms to make decisions about killing people on the battlefield, or making decisions about who should live and who should die, then I think this has implications for how it calibrates our relationship with technology in all sorts of other areas of life, where I think probably many of us in society recognize that that our relationship with technology is strained, and we don't necessarily feel fully in control of our digital identity. So all of these themes are kind of playing in the background of this issue. And fundamentally, we're talking about classification technologies that are going to divide people into groups, people who should be attacked, people who shouldn't be attacked. And this sort of embedding of classification structures, coupled with violence in the machinery of states and computer systems, feels deeply problematic in its potential for exacerbating inequalities and existing sort of negative prejudices and biases in society. I mean, as a final comment, we're working for a legal treaty on autonomous weapons, a legal treaty to ensure human control and to put boundaries in place to protect human control and to avoid the dehumanization of people in armed conflict. Working for legal treaties, as the Fossil Fuels Coalition has advantages in the sense that it gives you a clear sense of target and trajectory, but with it also comes certain challenges, and maybe we can talk about that in the discussion today. So looking forward to it.
Thank you, Richard. I think it's still something that I'm trying to grasp, really, how we've developed as a society to allow this to happen. You already know that, like, early days of Zoom, for example, wouldn't recognize higher pitched voices because as speaking, it would tend towards the lower ones, because when the AI was being trained, it was trained with men's voices, in particular, like Western European men's voices. And so it's the same technology that is now being used to, as you said, decide whether someone gets to live or not. And this is a global issue, especially because it will definitely affect global South voices the most, marginalized voices the most, because in our society already today, that has that structural injustice and oppression, and that's what the AI is being trained on. We're seeing that it's global South voices that will be most vulnerable for this too. So Gisela, I wanted to bring you in and ask you about what Peru por el Desarme focuses on and why it's so crucial to uplift Latin American and Global South perspectives in these global campaigns.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you very much for having me here. Well, I am leading the initiative, the social initiative Peru por el Desarme, which is a small organization that is member of the Stop Killer Robots campaign. And I also be part of the Latin American, the Caribbean network called CELAC, with whom we work on human security issues. Well, yes, we are part of this so-called Global South, but we will say, or at least myself, I prefer to say we are the global majority. And yes, it's true that in this field of building norms on disarmament, humanitarian disarmament issues, and also on peace issues and environmental issues, our voices are not necessarily in the table of people who are deciding, taking the lead decisions. In my country, it's true, for instance, that Peru is not developing weapons, autonomous weapon systems. But as you said, Mitzi, we are deeply vulnerable to their consequences. In fact, the threat is already here. Why it's important that we are here? Because in the case that's a challenge for us to convince the main authorities to understand that this is not a problem of the future or a problem just for the global north governments or states that are developing this technology. Because through the work we are doing with CELAC and Perú por el Desarme, we realized that there is a kind of autonomous weapon system, which is called baja gamma, I don't know how to say in English, low-end autonomous weapon systems, and that can proliferate to non-state actors in the region, such as organized crime. So we are talking about a real problem that we are facing right now. But in the case of our region, if you allow me to talking about Latin America, it's important also to realize that we have a history of surpassing or facing all these discriminations, all the colonialism, the domination, with resilience and resistance. And we have voices that must be listened. And not also voices that comes from the pain.
Gisela? I think we lost Gisela for a bit. Hopefully she comes back. But I really resonated with what she was saying about you're back. Okay, continue.
Yes.
We heard you until you said that we have voices that must be listened to, but not just voices around pain, but also.
Yes, we also have, yes, I was saying that we also have this creativity to surpass or to overcome these challenges. But this creativity based on experience, long-time experience as human rights defenders, as activists, as feminists that are engaged and always surveilling and being aware of the fundamental rights that are being violated, but by our own authorities. So I think that it's very important to have us in this campaign because we have a lot to say. And if we see also the history on humanitarian disarmament, we have this leadership, these proven leaderships in very successful treaties, such as the Tlatelolco Treaty, which allowed Latin America to be the first free nuclear weapon zone of the world, that also inspired other regional processes to ban these weapons. And if we talk about autonomous weapon systems, we can talk about the Communique of Belém, which was signed by 33 governments and states from the region. That was a key point, a milestone, we can say, in all this process, because it was the first time governments and civil society agreed to have the discussions beyond the UN, the CCW, the Convention of Certain Conventional Weapons, where the subject is blocked for more than a decade. And they decided to move to another space, more democratic, and they made this statement, this communique, which called for urgent in the urgent initiation of the negotiations of this legally binding instrument. And that was not just symbolic, that inspired all the other regional processes, and precisely in the global south, in Manila, in Philippines, and in Africa, in the ECOWAS region. Well, we have, I think that this is another kind of leadership that is not moved or supported on geopolitical interests, but overall centering human beings. That's
Thank you, Gisela. I really, really loved your points because it's similar in the Philippines where it is our government sometimes and our military that's threatening our environmental defenders. We're one of the most dangerous countries in the world and in Asia for environmental defenders and activists. And it's global north militaries that train our militaries, and eventually it's weapons that come from them that we end up using. And so it's definitely a conversation that we should be having within our countries as well, even if we're not the ones developing it, as you said. And I really love what you were saying about not just our voices of pain, but creativity and resilience. And we see this with the leadership of Global Majority, which the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty also has, right? It really started with Pacific leaders and then growing, and now we have Colombia as well, and we're seeing this regional strength. And I love the example that you gave around strengthening regionally and then how that affects the global scene. But there have also been many challenges. Richard, I think you were already starting to mention some of the challenges in when you were talking earlier. So I wanted to ask both of you, what have been some of the most difficult setbacks or obstacles the campaign has faced? What opposing narratives have you had to face or combat, especially maybe in the early days when you were starting out this coalition? For you, Richard.
Yeah, thanks, Mitzi. And I was also struck. I mean, there's a number of points Gisela made there. Obviously, they're really great. But that point about creativity is really interesting, I think, because while we learn lessons from the past and we're trying to learn lessons from each other, the idea of fostering creativity so that you're able to tackle the new challenges that you're presented with in new ways is a really, I think it's a really great point to highlight as a sort of macro level point. Yeah, in terms of challenges, lots of challenges, no doubt about that. And I think, at all sorts of different levels. I mean, to an extent, we face, I think, challenges of the sort of global narrative around these issues, techno optimism, a sort of blind faith that machines and computers will make better decisions than people, sort of suggestions around this of what's inevitable in society. And I think often on these processes we've worked on, sort of contesting what's inevitable is really important. And the more we can try to find a way to project a sense that the outcome that we're working towards is actually inevitable, I think that's always a strong position to be in, if we can find a way to compellingly communicate that. But there's certainly been, over the last 10 years, sort of strong narratives of technologies development being inevitable, the role and expansion of AI into every aspect of life being inevitable. And this, coupled with this sort of process of growing militarism that we've seen, well, over a decade now, but expanding every month, it feels like, creates a very difficult background, I think, against which to promote the ideas of positive norms and protective norms. I mean, of course, it also makes the development of those norms and those rules all the more important and all the more pressing. But there's definitely a sort of flow, it feels like, in many parts of global society that is pulling in a different direction there. Gisela also mentioned that certain diplomatic structures are also stacked against us, and this issue's been within a certain UN discussion framework, which is where states have kind of situated it. And that discussion framework is one that basically gives a veto to any state against making progress. And of course, it's the states who don't want rules of any kind who exert that veto, and they can exert that veto over every aspect, from the setting of the agenda for the next meeting, all along. So that's been a continuous process, coupled with a lack of positive leadership, I would say, particularly from the global north. I think European states have been extremely weak and short-sighted when it comes to recognizing the potential and the positive need for promoting normative rules and norms for protecting people and for building partnerships with the global majority, as Gisela framed it. There has been leadership from that side, and from Latin America and the Caribbean, from Sierra Leone, from the Philippines. There have been states who've stepped forward and said we do want to push forward positive work here, but states in the global north have been really reluctant for the most part. There are some who've been good, but it's always the same it's always the same few, and that causes a strain as well. I guess finally, I was suggesting it before, but it's a challenge for all of us working on these issues to keep going, to keep feeling like the work you're doing is making a difference, and that you are shaping the conversation in a useful way. And that's one of the challenges of having a treaty outcome as a goal, is that it makes the outcome seem very binary. Either we do have a treaty or we don't have a treaty, and until you have the treaty, then maybe you're not getting anywhere. And again, Gisela mentioned the Belém communique that was brought together by Latin American and Caribbean states. I think that's a good example of something that can provide a bit of a stepping stone along the way. So finding ways to keep ourselves positive and enjoying the work, I think, are important in this.
Thank you, Richard and Gisela.
Yes, well, I would also say, well, it's to change the mentality, of who take the decisions, and especially in the military domain, regarding the security or the concept of security, because as I listened the other day, the security for whom? Who is deciding which is secure? And if we are continue thinking of militarized security, we are making people, particularly from marginalized communities, more vulnerable. But also is this another way of diplomats have to but not only diplomats, that also governs and also the industry, to transform the mechanism and tell us that they are doing their work. They are looking for options. And for instance, I was thinking of this non-binding conference space, the REAIM, the International Conference on Responsible AI in the Military Domain, where the main militarized governments, such as the United States, are very into and saying that, well, we are working on a responsible AI, but wait, one of the key cards of this space is, well, we are not working on a legally binding instrument, but we are being responsible. So this, indeed, as a campaign, as a global campaign, we are not making advocacy, because we need also to be strategic and using a very responsible way our energies. We are not wasting our time trying to convince those who are already convinced in their way of acting. But these kind of arguments are very powerful for the governments we are dealing with, and trying to convince them that it's important to start negotiations of the legally binding instrument. And these other spaces is just like, well, we are waiting. But the thing is that during this conversation, there is also the development of algorithms that can kill. And we are wasting time. So one of the main challenges is also that there is this balance on between the pace of technology and the pace of diplomatic logics and negotiations. So this is another thing that differentiates our campaign from other campaigns. And in general, if we talk about AI, who can make these autonomous weapon systems more dangerous and is being normalized in our lives. It's being sold like something that is very necessary and very useful and very good for humanity. But if you see the process of governance of AI, the AI governance, the topic of autonomous weapon system, of the AI in the military domain, are just entering, but not in. I would prefer that it would be a main topic of the agenda, because we are talking about human life and the death or life. So that's another thing that we need to face when we work on this issue. Another thing that I would like also to mention was that at the beginning, the campaign started with a preventive approach because there was no proven harm of the use of these autonomous weapon systems. But as you know, we are facing a very horrific situation in the world. And even though we can't say that these are autonomous weapon systems, but because that's one of the challenges of trying to prove that it's totally autonomous, we see what's happening in Gaza. The AI, the use of algorithms and AI from the Israeli governments against Palestinians, targeting and killing them. And yes, I know that are not this topic for the related to the autonomous weapons discussion, but as we are talking also about humanitarian issues, we are also seeing, or not, we can't avoid this problem. We are also talking about this in our different spaces and forums. Because, well, it's in my own perspective, we as people from Latin America, from Asia, from the global, so in generally, we can accept the silence. The silence is something that we need also to break, and in a creative way, always, but also in this with this goal to create peace from our perspectives. And well, for me personally, this is a very difficult situation. Try to not forget, especially I understand that we have different processes. I talk about the diplomatic processes, but with civil society, with other agents, and even in our national, regional level, we need to also to pay attention to these disastrous situations that are related to the cause we defend.
Thank you, Gisela. Thank you for bringing in Gaza and Palestine. And you're completely correct. What we're seeing now is a complete breakdown in disregard of international human rights. And as Richard was saying earlier, there's already like some break, it's not perfect what we have now. And then this AI autonomous weapons is just going to make that worse. And I can already think of it, like it might not be weapons necessarily, but surveillance and silencing of people and I don't really know, but I assume that's how the US border is also checking people's history and how they're talking about the government. So it's a crushing silence, and it's a tool that's being used to make that silence more oppressive for all of us, really. So yes, I really hear all the challenges, and I would say with the time urgency, it's very similar with the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, where we have that urgency of the pace of destruction of the fossil fuel industry, and so linked to that is the militarization aspect, because often the reason why countries are occupying or doing genocides or doing war is because there's oil or fossil fuels in that area and they want to take something. And we have a research with the fossil fuel treaty that links conflict and war with fossil fuels. So I'll put that into the chat later. But then there's the pace of destruction. And as you said, like I liked how you termed it. I think you said like the diplomatic logic and negotiation. It's like, oh yeah, it's just paperwork, and it's like they don't realize what's at stake here. And you're very correct, where it's at the end of the day, it's about human life. It's about making sure that we have that, and it's difficult. And Richard, you were already talking about how do we continue this momentum. So my next question is, what have been the turning points of the campaign before? What have been some lows, and then how did you come out of that? But if you also, feel more low right now, that's also okay. But I'm curious if there have been like these moments of turning points.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, Gisela there brings out, I think, some key issues, and I think learning issue there is around policy flexibility. The campaign started with a particular view of autonomous weapon systems as being the focal issue, and I think it's clear that the use of these AI decision-making systems over targeting is also a key issue that's fundamentally linked to that in the world. And so the campaign earlier this year sort of made a decision to expand its policy perspective to encompass that. And I think that then perhaps creates some, well, opportunities for engagement and advocacy in the world, but also like a slightly different orientation to outcomes, because that maybe wouldn't be in the same treaty as a treaty on autonomous weapons, but that gives us a bit more of a sort of diversity of directions for the future. And I think that, you know, I think that's important, to be able to be flexible as a coalition in response to, well, in response to the world you're operating in, right? Because these coalitions and organizations like ours, we only have utility if we're actually trying to change something in the world that makes a difference. So that's a thing. I think you know, in terms of keeping positive, it's not always possible to stay positive. I definitely have my distinct ups and downs as a person, but I think celebrating small victories, or I mean, they're not even small victories. Celebrating the victories that you have is important. When you get new voices joining your coalition, new voices speaking in favor of the goal that you're working towards, you know, making sure you feel positive about that. The types of outcomes, again, Gisela mentioned before, the sort of Latin American and Caribbean states communique on the issue of autonomous weapons, ECOWAS communique developed by Sierra Leone, you know, various other sort of regional outcomes, which take a lot of work to get to, and we need to make sure we see those as you know, really positive outcomes in their own right. Yeah, I think there's an extent to which you also need to try to find ways to keep a sense that our work is emblematic of a wider framework, and that the ongoing work we're doing is having a benefit, even if it's not sort of immediately creating the treaty outcome. And I think that's part of the challenge of working in these processes, where you have that very distinct goal, is how do you also just keep feeling like what you're doing on a day-to-day basis has value in itself and is helping to shape an international conversation, you know, in a positive way, and is, you know, that the value of your work isn't just dependent on some future outcome that you can't wholly control. So I think that's something that we need to often help each other to keep that feeling as well, because mutual support, I think, is part of this. Yeah, and yeah, as part of mutual support, I guess I said before, enjoying working together is important. It's not always easy to enjoy working together in any configuration. You know, people are amazing, but people are also difficult, and we cause difficulties with each other. And once we're organized into institutional structures, we find new ways to cause difficulties for each other. So, you know, coalition work and, you know, these sort of collective campaigns are always going to bring up tensions and difficulties, but we need to find ways to keep talking to each other through those processes and keep a sense that we are bound together by our shared sort of desire to work on a particular goal, and to find a way to keep that to the fore, maybe.
Thank you, Richard. And Gisela?
Yes, I agree. I totally agree with Richard. I think one of the key things in order to keep on not losing the hope is to celebrate these victories. Yes, as you said, Richard, there are not small victories. They are very important. Well, that's true. We don't have a treaty, not yet, but we have done a lot of things. One of the things, I am talking in my very personal way, that inspired me in this campaign, and trying not to say, well, okay, that's it, see you on another on another moment of our lives, is that there is a legacy. I mean, the other campaigns, the other humanitarian disarmament campaigns you mentioned at the beginning of this talk, and you have invited key leaders from the cluster munition process, the landmine process, nuclear weapon process. Many of them are also part of Stop Killer Robots as Richard. They are the founders of this movement, and my colleagues from CELAC also, they were key in these processes. I had also a participation in some of these processes. So we know each other. Yes, we work together, we are colleagues, but also we know each other as human beings. And one of the things that I always said that it's true that in our work, we talk with governments, we sometimes need to be very technical, very specific, sometimes very cold, but we always try to remember what's the main purpose, why we are here, why we continue believing that peace is possible to be created in another way. We are not waiting. We are always trying to propose a different way of living. So, and yes, as Richard mentioned, this achievement of the Communique of Belém, in the case of Latin America, empowered not only we as civil society organizations, but the states. And this is very important in order to make decision and to stand in front of the powerful in these other places, as the CCW, the Convention of Certain Conventional Weapons, where if you see the delegations coming from the Global South are so reduced, sometimes one diplomat is talking about different armaments and different issues, and they don't understand sometimes very well what is the problem. And the big countries, they have very big delegations with experts in each session, in each aspect, focusing in just defining what is the kind of weapon we need to prohibit, and then the years pass and pass. So with this kind of victories, like the Costa Rica, with the Belém Communique, empowered these diplomats that they can change this trend, and also they feel more secure, in order to share their arguments. And well, we as civil society, we accompany them. And from CELAC and Perú por el Desarme, we are also analyzing in a very deep way what's the impact on our region. As I mentioned before, these low-end autonomous weapon systems, the proliferation towards organized crime, the use of drones, maybe not in a fully autonomous way, but in a semi-automatic way, but that there is showing us this future not so far from us, and that the scenario we are dealing with is very complicated. So I think that's it.
No, thank you both. It's so true. I think also with the climate movement, or at least for the youth climate movement for sure, we forget to celebrate the wins, and we forget how human rights organizations, how civil society has won before. So I really appreciate also what you both brought in about the previous treaties and how this has been successful. And in the very beginning, Richard, I think one of the things you said was it's important for us to work together. So how do you think climate and disarmament movements can work better together? Why is it important to build power across these issues, regions, and silos?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is really helpful to have conversations across these groups, and partly because a lot of these issues are interconnected, of course, and there's a sense to which they maybe seem to be operating in separate spheres, but ultimately it feels like there is a degree of common struggle underneath these issues around militarism and to my mind, capitalism to a degree, and around our relationship with states and the way in which states as institutional structures reflect or don't reflect, what's actually in the interests of people in society. So civil society coalitions are a vehicle that can try to find ways to communicate and support each other on some of these themes. I mean, I think it's also obviously great and fundamental to have the cross-regional perspectives, because I mean, it's come out in this conversation in lots of different ways, but left to their own devices, the countries of the north would tend to pull towards militarism and pull towards maintaining their dominance in the world, and there's a need to have partnerships that extend outside of that and pull back against that, and I think that's really important. Yeah, try and find ways to also, people might be interested in issues that they didn't know about. So, so finding ways that maybe people and organizations from one area can find, a cause that they're interested in another area. I think sometimes we are still, as a community, we are quite a little bit siloed. We're still mainly coming from a community of people who've worked on weapons policy related issues in the past and work on weapons and violence related issues. And I think the autonomous weapons issue engages with societal themes that extend well beyond that, but we don't always have the capacity to build that community out wider. And I think so that's an ongoing process of work. Another reflection, which doesn't really answer your question, but just came to me when Gisela was talking before also, is just to reflect on, with these other treaties that already exist and these other instruments, they do always, when you look back on them, it always looks pretty straightforward that they flow from, an idea here through some meetings there to the outcome that looks inevitable, obviously with the benefit of hindsight. And I think it's important to remember, if we're reflecting on lessons learned from other processes, that throughout those processes, they all felt entirely uncertain whether they were going to be successful or not. And there was loads of points where difficult policy decisions had to be made and difficult institutional decisions had to be made. Anyway, there was so much uncertainty in it. And it's just, I think, really useful to keep in mind that what looks sort of plain sailing with hindsight was often seen as being completely impossible at the time. And what does seem impossible, to us in the present, we can often change what's possible by just changing the landscape and changing the scenery somehow, and finding ways to create new opportunities that go beyond what people think we can do.
Thank you, Richard. And Gisela?
Thank you for this question, because I think for us, it's also inviting us to add a new path also to talk about the impact on environment of war, of militarization, and in the case of our work on autonomous weapon systems. The good thing is that in the discussions from governments, they are putting this topic on the agenda. And I would like to mention the Manila meeting in 2023, because in their workshop, they state about the impact. And I'm going just to read one part, saying that autonomous submarines, for instance, might seem clean, but their environmental damage threatens marine ecosystems that sustain entire communities. So we are not talking about a harmless war when it destroys the conditions for life. So yes, climate justice and disarmament challenge the same root problem. We are talking about extractive systems that threat life as expendable, whether through fossil fuels or automated warfare. So I think we need each other, and trying to understand that climate breakdown fuels war, war fuels militarization, and militarization accelerates collapse. The same colonial, racial, and patriarchal system shape who is sacrificed and who survived. So when we bridge these movements, we expand that's political possible. We amplify frontline voices for instance, indigenous peoples, Afro-descendant, feminist, youth, and we can redefine what security means. Not control, but care, not domination, but interdependence. And I would just add that stopping killer robots and stopping fossil fuel are part of the same fight, and we only win if we do it together. So thank you for this opportunity. We are learning from each other.
That is truly so powerful, Gisela. Yeah, before I reflect, maybe there are some questions from the audience. Feel free to raise your hand and unmute, or also put it into the chat if you would rather. Yeah, stay muted. Something that, yes, Alex, go ahead.
Hi, Gisela and Richard. Thank you so much for these reflections, but also for the work that you've done on this issue. And I wanted to ask a question about the issue is quite complex in lots of different ways, and there are a lot of technical pieces of it, and how you navigate speaking about the issue for the different audiences, whether there's time or controlling your tone or changing the way that you want to speak, maybe publicly because you're worried about how it reflect to diplomatic people, or whether how much the drive is around a broader public understanding of the message and building public engagement, whether you find trade-offs with engaging with more diplomatic stakeholders. Check.
I remember when we were preparing for the session, Richard and Gisela, you both had similar questions and also really interesting insights. So again, it's how do you navigate the different audiences in your messaging?
Yeah, do you want me to go first? No. I mean, I think it's a key question, and I think one that we've struggled with a bit, actually. It's been quite difficult, partly because the technical discussion on autonomous weapons in the diplomatic space is also one where none of the terminology is defined and all of the terminology is contested within a politicized environment. So it's quite difficult for people to feel confident that they actually understand the policy dynamics of the issue in real detail. And I mean, Gisela mentioned before the importance of that conference as a structure for empowering diplomats. It's an ongoing issue for us, empowering coalition members as well as diplomats to feel confident that they have an understanding of the subject matter, that they can feel assertive on and can feel confident in when other people are, of course, chipping away at that, which is part of the nature of the diplomatic space. At the same time, I'm a diplomatic space person, on my ongoing working mode, right? So I do a lot of work engaging with governments and the like. That pulls me towards engaging in the sort of the technical policy language quite a lot, and at the same time that doesn't communicate into the wider social space in a way that's very straightforward. I think the coalition campaign name Stop Killer Robots is speaking to this wider space. That causes tension in the diplomatic space where people try to sort of suggest, well, that sounds you're overselling the issue, so there's an effort to discredit it there. I think making sure there's a balance between these different audiences is important, and one of the challenges, I mean, you could just go on and on about this question because it's fundamental to the nature of campaigning, right? But it's difficult for us also to get enough public engagement to make these issues politically significant at a national level, which needs public communication, not just sort of technocratic policy wonk communication. But there's so many other issues that are fighting for attention in the world that it's difficult to get this issue right to the point where it's of critical importance for states. So yeah, I mean, we could talk in great detail about those dynamics. I don't think we've always got it right, but it's also it's an ongoing work in progress, right? Key issue, I think.
Thank you, Richard. And Gisela, you also told us about this before, about what Richard was saying, where so many people in Latin America have other focuses. How do you navigate this? And how has your organization navigated this?
Yes. First of all, I would like to mention that it was also a challenge for us. When I entered the campaign, it was to understand everything, and it's a complex issue. Try to understand the definition, what is fully or total autonomous technology, and then AI enter into the field, into the game, and then everything is very complex. So I guess that the campaign has done as a world coalition excellent work, providing us also to some of the key explanations. For us, we are working in different humanitarian disarmament processes with other kind of weapons, but we are not talking about one physically weapon. We are talking about a system of weapons of so complex. And I guess that in my case, well, one part was also to contact experts in AI and engineers, robotics experts from our region, from my country also, in order to have a deep conversation about these notions. But understanding that if I arrived to talk with a parliamentarian here in Peru, for instance, about Stop Killer Robots coalition, immediately they thought, what futuristic thing you are talking about? And the translation into Spanish, Detener a los robots asesinos, is almost like, what are you talking? So we are we are always adapting our narratives. And in the case of my country, I know that I need to part from zero to explain the concept that we are not talking about a future war. And as I mentioned before, the real risks for our region, our country, our countries, our realities. And creating this link to organized crime, for instance, which is a main threat for our security here in the region, allowed me also to invite people from academia who are working on this. For instance, in my case, I also part of a feminist human security network called Amasuru, who are working on organized crime threats. So that's another possibility also to inviting other people who are working on other topics to be more involved. On the other hand, well, the global campaign has also this initiative, the automated decision research, which provides a lot of technical information that we also use in order to give to diplomats and other authorities and to better understand the topic we are dealing with. But one of the sectors, if I can say, I like to work is with young people from universities. And in my case, I have organized some workshops with journalist students in Peru. And one of the key concepts that the Stop Killer Robots campaign has proposed to think of is the digital dehumanization. Understanding that this is a process when we delegate to the machine the capacity to make decisions for us. And this is a process that exists in our daily lives. Just when we are, I don't know, listening to Netflix, to Spotify, or watching a series of Netflix, and we think that the algorithm, that we are choosing we are making our choices, but indeed it's the algorithm that have already profiled us and say, well, that's what you like, so I am going to show you all these kind of the movies or TV shows or etc. But in the worst case scenario is this logic of automatization can go in the military domain and we are talking about our lives. So when we make this connection, this concept is very powerful, especially when we work with different audiences, especially with young people, because there is something that is related to them. So one of the key aspects for us is to try to find this key aspect of their lives, analyzing each audience that can be the good connection in order to make them think, oh yes, I understand this. This is also part of me, of my life, of the circumstances I have to live all the time. So it's like when I like this word of creativity. We adapt this technical and sometimes very complex issues and concepts to a more general speech and notions.
Thank you. Thank you. We have time for one last question. So I ask you both, what question would you like to leave with the audience today? So to the people in the audience, this is something that our speakers want you to think about after you leave this session. Richard, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I knew you were going to ask this, so I did get a chance to think about it, but then I still couldn't quite formulate this properly as a question without it seeming a bit weird. But I guess what I wondered was, when you get to the final negotiations, of the treaty, or you get towards the final negotiations in the preparatory conferences and into the final negotiations of the treaty, what's going to be more important, the detailed policy arguments or the good quality logistics and administration that the coalition has put together in the background of all that? You can see I'm pointing in a certain direction, maybe.
That's a very good question. And Gisela?
Well, I was thinking, I just would say, I'm talking more from the activist and the capacity of engagement to these causes. How can we expose and resist together this narrative that militarized AI and climate destruction are inevitable? Because one of the things that they say no is technology is inevitable. And also we can't let or stop using fossil fuels. So how can we change this narrative together?
Wow, thank you. Thank you both. And it's really some of the key insights that I really got from this talk is the importance of the narrative and finding the balance with your different audiences and finding the interconnection. I really love what you said, Gisela, about how fossil fuels fuel war to get more fossil fuels, and then war accelerates collapse. And it's the same patriarchal colonial that colonial system that shapes who dies and who survives. And it is really about life at the end of the day. And something that I keep remembering is that the system wants us to work independently, to be in silos, to compete with each other, because then we're weaker. And they want us to be separated from each other, but also from the past, and from ourselves. And so what you both really reminded us today of looking into the past, looking at the previous treaties, and what you said, Richard, about how it seems straightforward now, but then back then it wasn't like that. And one of my favorite quotes is from Rebecca Solnit. I'm paraphrasing, but it's like, the future is uncertain because it isn't written. And so bringing in that idea of what is inevitable and bringing the creativity that we all have and practicing that creativity to think of possibilities so that we can finally have a climate just and peace future through hopefully a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty and an autonomous weapons treaty. So thank you so much for being here and for everyone coming. I would just request everyone to take a picture with us. So please turn your photo on if you want to. And then I think Zoe will be taking the screenshot. If you could count us down, Zoe.
Okay, everyone. I'm gonna take a photo in 3, 2, 1. Thank you all.
Thank you. And we need to take these lessons, share them, and push for action. This is not just a series of talks, it's a movement. I mean, everyone in this room and beyond to help it grow. So please keep the conversation going, share the session with your networks, and let's keep learning together. So the previous sessions, you can, and this one will be on our Treaty website and on the YouTube channel. I also wanted to invite everyone to the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaties Virtual Summit, which is happening from September 8 to 15 online, and I'm sending the registration link into the chat. Thank you, everyone.
Everyone, take care.
Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you.